The grand hall was filled with music, lights, and an air of celebration. It was the night of the Empress's annual gala, and the entire alien elite had gathered in anticipation. The long marble floors glistened beneath the crystal chandeliers, casting a soft glow over the guests. The soft hum of conversations and laughter filled the air as servants in elegant attire moved around, offering exotic drinks and delicacies. The decorations were out of this world, with floating orbs of light and shimmering flowers that only existed in the most distant galaxies. At the center of the room, the Empress stood with her guests, her regal presence undeniable. Her long flowing gown, adorned with intricate patterns, caught the light with each movement. Her dark eyes scanned the crowd, her face composed and controlled. She was a powerful ruler, respected and admired by many. Her people adored her, and her decisions shaped the destiny of an entire empire. Yet, despite the grand spectacle, there was a hollow feeling inside her. Her daughter, who sat at the far corner of the room, was the only source of the Empress's deep inner conflict. The girl, born with a disability, had always been distant from the celebrations that took place in the royal court. Her wheelchair, a constant companion, seemed to push her further away from the bright world her mother ruled. The Empress, despite her powerful reign, could not seem to make her daughter's life any easier. No matter how many luxuries or comforts she provided, her daughter remained distant, trapped in her own world of silence and stillness. The Empress's gaze lingered on her daughter for a moment longer. She could see the sadness in her eyes, the loneliness that only her daughter could feel. No matter how many alien doctors and healers she brought to the palace, nothing seemed to change. Her daughter remained the same, distant, never truly part of the royal world. It weighed heavily on the Empress's heart. She had spent so much time trying to create an empire that was perfect. But what about her family? What about her daughter? The music continued to play, but the Empress's thoughts drifted. She remembered when her daughter was born how excited she had been to have a child. She had imagined the two of them, ruling together, powerful and united. But now, her daughter was nothing more than a distant figure in the corner, silently watching the celebration. The Empress felt a pang of guilt, but she quickly pushed it aside, as she always did. She was the Empress, after all, and duty came first. At that moment, a human waiter passed by, carrying a tray of glowing drinks. He was the only human in the entire palace, a rare guest in a world dominated by aliens. His uniform was simple, yet it was clear that he didn't belong to the royal court. He was out of place, a mere servant, but his eyes were curious, his gaze lingering on the Empress's daughter. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. The Empress didn't notice at first, but something in the air changed. The waiter, with his plain uniform and humble demeanor, seemed to see her daughter in a way that no one else had. The daughter, who had always been aloof and detached from the world around her, looked up at the waiter with something that resembled interest. The Empress watched. Her interest piqued. She had seen her daughter glance at the staff before, but never with such focus. She had never seen her daughter's expression shift so subtly, so gently. The human waiter, it seemed, had captured her attention in a way that no alien prince or noble had been able to. As the waiter moved past, the Empress couldn't help but wonder what had just happened. What was it about this simple human that had caught her daughter's attention? The question lingered in her mind, and for the first time that night, she felt a spark of curiosity. She could feel something changing in the air, something that could alter the course of her daughter's life, and perhaps her own. But for now, she could only watch from a distance, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. The night was young, and this was only the beginning. The Empress had no idea that what seemed like a chance encounter would soon lead to a moment that would change everything. The night grew deeper, and the grand hall continued to pulse with energy, its rhythm vibrating through the floor beneath the guests' feet. But for the Empress, the world around her seemed to blur into the background. Her eyes were locked onto her daughter, who sat in her usual spot, seemingly untouched by the excitement that filled the room. It had always been this way. Her daughter, the silent observer, always separated by an invisible barrier from the world of luxury and grandeur. The human waiter moved through the crowd again, this time walking slowly past the daughter's table. His eyes flickered toward her, noticing the quiet sadness in her eyes. It wasn't pity that he felt, but something else, a sense of understanding, an unspoken connection. He had seen it before in others, the same longing, the same loneliness. He didn't belong to this world, but for some reason, he felt compelled to do something that no one else had dared. Without thinking, he stopped. He cleared his throat, his voice quiet but clear as he addressed the daughter, who seemed to take no notice of anyone else. "Would you like to dance?" His words hung in the air, almost too simple for such a grand occasion, but something in them carried weight. The daughter looked up at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The Empress, watching from a distance, narrowed her eyes. She had heard the waiter's words, and she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her daughter, who never interacted with anyone, was being offered a dance by a human, someone so far beneath her status. The audacity of it was jarring, yet something inside her stirred. She couldn't take her eyes off the scene unfolding before her. The daughter hesitated. She had never danced before, at least not in front of anyone. Her disability had always kept her isolated, confined to the shadows of society. Yet, in the human waiter's eyes, she saw no judgment, no pity. There was only an invitation to something more, something beyond her own limitations. Slowly, she reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it in his. The human waiter smiled softly, gently guiding her from her chair. For the first time, the daughter felt weightless, as though the world had shifted in a way she had never expected. Her body moved awkwardly at first, unfamiliar with the rhythm of the dance. But the waiter was patient. He didn't rush her, didn't push her beyond what she could handle. He simply guided her with slow, careful movements, encouraging her to follow his lead. The Empress watched, her heart racing. She had never seen her daughter so alive, so full of energy. The way the human moved with her, the way he held her gently, as though she were the most precious thing in the world. It was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. There was a grace in their movements, a fluidity that seemed impossible, given her daughter's condition. Yet, there they were, moving together in perfect harmony, as if nothing else mattered. The music played softly in the background, but for the Empress, it was as if the world had gone silent. Her thoughts were chaotic, swirling with questions she couldn't answer. Why had the waiter chosen to dance with her daughter? What was it about this simple human that made him stand out in a world so full of luxury and sophistication? And why did her daughter seem so different, so alive in his presence? She felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion stir inside her, a mix of wonder and something else she couldn't quite name. She had always prided herself on her ability to control everything around her, but now, in this moment, she realized she had no control at all. For the first time, she wasn't sure what was happening, and it terrified her. As the dance continued, the Empress felt a shift in the air. It wasn't just the music or the movement, but something deeper, a transformation that was unfolding right before her eyes. Her daughter, once a symbol of her failures, was now dancing freely, without a care in the world. And the human waiter, the one who should have been invisible in this palace of riches, had somehow made her daughter feel something no one else ever had. The Empress couldn't help but wonder, could this be the start of something truly remarkable? The dance continued, and the Empress couldn't tear her gaze away. Every step, every movement between the human waiter and her daughter felt like a delicate thread weaving a bond that seemed impossible. Her daughter, who had always been trapped in her own quiet world, now seemed to glow with a newfound energy. It wasn't just the dance, it was the connection. The human, so simple in his actions, was giving her something the Empress could never have provided, a sense of freedom, a moment where she wasn't defined by her disability. As the song played on, the room around them faded into the background, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The guests whispered amongst themselves, puzzled by the scene unfolding before them. They had never seen the Empress's daughter smile so genuinely, so openly, and the Empress, who had always been the embodiment of control and strength, felt a strange vulnerability creeping in. The power she had wielded for so long, the control she had imposed over her empire, suddenly felt so distant, so irrelevant in this quiet, intimate moment. She could hear the soft rustle of her gown as she shifted slightly, moving closer to the dance floor, though she remained unnoticed by the pair. Her mind was racing. The waiter, a human who had no place in her world, had unlocked something in her daughter that she had never thought possible. The joy radiating from her daughter's face was unmistakable, a joy she hadn't seen in years. The laughter, the pure happiness, was like a beam of light breaking through the cold walls of the palace. But what had caused it? Was it simply the human's kindness, or was there something deeper at play here? Something that went beyond the surface? For years, the Empress had sheltered her daughter, keeping her away from the outside world. She had surrounded her with the best doctors, the finest healers, hoping to cure what was wrong, to make her daughter normal. But now, she realized how little she truly understood about what her daughter needed. It wasn't perfection or a cure she sought, it was connection. It was the chance to feel like a part of something, to experience the world beyond the palace walls, even if only for a fleeting moment. The Empress's heart tightened as she watched the waiter guide her daughter through the final steps of the dance. His touch was gentle, his movements confident yet tender, as if he knew exactly what she needed without ever being told. He wasn't treating her like a fragile being to be handled with care. He was treating her like a person, like anyone else. And for the first time, her daughter responded, her movements flowing with ease and grace. It was as though she had found a rhythm, a pulse that had been missing for so long. The Empress felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in ages: admiration. She admired the human for his simple yet profound ability to change the atmosphere, to break through barriers that had once seemed unbreakable. But she also felt a deep sense of loss. How had she failed her daughter all these years? She had been so focused on curing her, on changing her, that she had never considered that what her daughter needed most was acceptance, a chance to simply be. The music slowed, bringing the dance to a gentle close. The human waiter stepped back, bowing slightly, a respectful smile on his face. Her daughter's smile was wide, brighter than any star in the night sky. The Empress, standing in the shadows, felt something stir inside her, something raw, something she wasn't prepared for. It was as if the dance had unlocked a door she didn't even know existed. And through it, she saw her daughter not as a burden, not as a symbol of her failure, but as a person, vibrant and full of potential. As the final notes of the song faded, the Empress's world had changed. The quiet, invisible walls she had built around herself and her daughter began to crack. The human waiter, with his simple act of kindness, had done more for her daughter in a few minutes than the Empress had managed in years. And for the first time, the Empress didn't know how to respond. She was no longer sure of the path ahead, but she was certain of one thing: the old ways had failed her, and the new way was something she had never expected. The dance was over, but the atmosphere in the room was anything but quiet. The guests, once distracted by their own conversations and celebrations, were now focused entirely on the unlikely scene that had unfolded before them. The human waiter, no longer just a servant, stood with a quiet grace beside the Empress's daughter, who still seemed lost in the joy of the moment. The Empress could see it now, the change in her daughter, so subtle yet so profound. It wasn't just the smile, though that alone was a rare sight. It was something deeper, a newfound spark of confidence that radiated from her. She had watched her daughter for years, trying to protect her, trying to shield her from the harsh realities of life. But now, for the first time, she realized that protection had only kept her daughter isolated. In trying to control her world, she had created walls that kept her from experiencing the freedom, the connection that so many others took for granted. The Empress's heart pounded in her chest. She felt a strange mixture of pride and guilt, pride in seeing her daughter so happy, but guilt in knowing how much she had kept her from truly living. She had thought that the grand palace, the finest doctors, and the most advanced technologies could fix everything. But in truth, what her daughter needed was something far simpler: human connection, understanding, and acceptance, something the Empress had never been able to provide. As she watched her daughter, now sitting contentedly in her chair, still smiling, she felt a growing sense of unease. The human waiter had sparked something in her, something the Empress couldn't ignore. He had brought her daughter back to life in a way that no alien doctor or healer had ever done. He had treated her like a person, not a project to be fixed. It was a lesson the Empress had failed to learn until now, Her gaze flickered to the waiter, who was quietly stepping away, perhaps embarrassed by the attention. The Empress found herself walking toward him, drawn by an impulse she couldn't fully understand. She stopped just a few feet away from him, and for a moment, neither spoke. The noise of the gala seemed distant, as if the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. He looked up at her, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice respectful but hesitant. "I didn't mean to." "No, you didn't," the Empress interrupted, her voice softer than she expected. "But you did more for my daughter in one moment than I have in years." He shifted uncomfortably, looking away. "I'm just a waiter, Your Majesty. I didn't mean to overstep." The Empress's expression softened. "You didn't. You've done something that no one else has been able to do." She paused, her mind racing with thoughts she wasn't sure how to express. "You've shown her something real. You've given her something I couldn't, something I didn't even know she needed." The human's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, the Empress saw him not as a servant, but as a man. A simple man, yes, but one who had done what no noble or royal ever could. He had connected with her daughter, not as a ruler or an outsider, but as someone who truly understood the importance of seeing another person for who they were, not for what they could be fixed into. "I never meant to change anything," the waiter replied, his voice still low. "I just wanted to help." The Empress nodded, feeling a stirring within her that she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a mix of admiration, gratitude, and something else, something that made her question the world she had built around herself. "You've done more than help," she said quietly. "You've changed everything." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of her words hanging between them. The Empress realized she had been so caught up in the pursuit of control, in the belief that she had to fix everything, that she had missed the most important thing of all, the need for connection. It wasn't just about her daughter anymore, it was about her. The Empress had been living in a cage of her own making, and now she was beginning to understand that it wasn't the outside world that needed to change. It was her own perspective. With a final look at the human waiter, she turned away. But this time, her heart felt lighter. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt a sense of possibility. The Empress was no longer the ruler who had all the answers. She was a mother, facing the unknown alongside her daughter, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The Empress stood by the grand windows, gazing out over the sprawling city that lay beneath her palace. The glittering lights of her empire stretched as far as the eye could see, a symbol of her power, her success, her reign. Yet, for the first time in her life, it all felt distant, distant in a way she hadn't expected. The weight of her crown, once a source of immense pride, now felt almost unbearable, pressing against her head as she reflected on everything that had transpired in the past few hours. Her thoughts returned to the dance. The image of her daughter, smiling, her face alive with joy, replayed in her mind. She had seen that smile before, but not like this, not in the way that made her daughter seem free. It was the first time she had truly seen her daughter not as a symbol of her own failures, but as a young woman, vibrant and full of potential. The connection between the human waiter and her daughter had awakened something inside the Empress, a realization that had been buried beneath layers of duty and control for so long. She hadn't understood it at first. How could she? Her life had always been one of power and responsibility, her every decision calculated, her every move deliberate. The thought of letting go of that control, of allowing something as fragile as a simple dance to change everything, had been unthinkable. But now she could not deny the truth that had become so clear to her. She had been so focused on fixing her daughter, on making her better, that she had never stopped to consider what her daughter truly needed. It wasn't healing or perfection, it was acceptance. It was the chance to live a life, to experience something beyond the walls of the palace, beyond the careful boundaries the Empress had set. The human waiter had given her daughter that, and in doing so, he had given the Empress something even more precious, a glimpse into a world she had never truly seen before. It wasn't just about changing the way she viewed her daughter. It was about changing the way she viewed herself, her power, and her place in the universe. But how could she act on this revelation? The weight of the empire rested on her shoulders, and her people expected nothing less than absolute control, absolute strength. To show vulnerability, to let go of that control, could be disastrous. Could she risk everything she had built for the sake of something so intangible as connection? Could she risk everything for her daughter's happiness? She thought back to the conversation she had had with the human waiter. His words, simple but honest, echoed in her mind. I just wanted to help. He had no agenda, no hidden motives. He hadn't come to her palace seeking favor or recognition. He had simply seen a person in need and offered them what they had been missing, compassion. In that moment, the Empress realized that true strength didn't lie in domination. In control it lay in understanding, in the willingness to see others as equals, not as obstacles to be overcome. The thought made her uneasy. She had spent so long building an empire based on power and fear. The idea of leading with empathy, of allowing vulnerability into the fabric of her reign, felt like stepping into uncharted territory. But wasn't that what her daughter needed? Wasn't that what she needed? Turning from the window, the Empress walked back to the hall. Her daughter was no longer at the table, but the human waiter was still there, quietly talking to one of the palace staff. The Empress watched him for a moment, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She knew deep down that this was a turning point. She could no longer ignore the path that had opened up before her. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing: she couldn't go back. The walls she had built around her daughter, around herself, had to come down. If she wanted her daughter to truly live, to experience the world in all its beauty and pain, she had to start with herself. She had to be willing to change. For the first time, the Empress felt a sense of clarity. The empire was important, yes, but her family, her daughter, and the life they could build together, that was everything. The Empress sat alone in the quiet of her chambers, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. The weight of the decision she had made earlier in the day pressed heavily on her chest, yet she felt a strange sense of calm. The grand gala had ended, the guests had dispersed, and her palace once again felt like a cold, hollow shell. Yet inside her, a fire was kindling, one that had been dormant for far too long. She thought about her daughter. How much had she held her back over the years? How much of her life had been spent protecting her from the world, sheltering her in an invisible cage of rules and expectations? She had tried so hard to shield her from harm, but in doing so, she had kept her from experiencing the very things that could have made her life full. The dance with the human waiter had opened her eyes, and now she could not unsee the truth. Her daughter, for all her struggles, was capable of so much more than the Empress had ever allowed her to believe. The Empress's mind drifted back to the human waiter. His simple act of kindness, his unassuming presence, had done what no royal physician or healer could. He had brought out something in her daughter that had been locked away for so long. It wasn't magic or miracle cures, it was understanding. The human hadn't treated her daughter as a patient or a project to be fixed. He had treated her as a person who was worthy of the same respect and care as anyone else. A strange sense of guilt washed over the Empress. She had been so focused on her empire, on her own power, that she had forgotten what truly mattered. She had built an empire based on strength, on control, but at what cost? Her daughter had suffered in silence, trapped in a world where her condition defined her. No amount of wealth, no amount of luxury could have changed that. Only the human waiter had been able to see beyond her disability, to see her for who she truly was. And now, the Empress understood that she had to change, not just for her daughter, but for herself. For too long, she had relied on her position, her authority, to define her worth. But power was not the same as strength. True strength came from the willingness to be vulnerable, to allow others into your world, and to admit that you didn't have all the answers. She could no longer hide behind the walls of her empire, pretending that everything was perfect, that she had everything under control. The truth was that she didn't, and that was okay. She stood up, the decision settling firmly in her mind. Tomorrow, she would change things. She would start by removing the barriers that had kept her daughter isolated, and she would do it not with the force of her authority, but with the strength of her heart. She would allow her daughter to experience the world beyond the palace, to live a life that was not defined by her disability, but by her potential. The Empress would no longer be the ruler who commanded her people with fear and control. She would be the mother who nurtured her daughter with love and understanding. Her empire would adapt, and so would she. It wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be messy, complicated, and uncertain. But for the first time in years, the Empress felt a spark of hope. Hope that things could be different. That she and her daughter could finally step into the light of a future that wasn't constrained by the past. She walked to the door, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Tomorrow would be the first day of a new chapter, not just for her daughter, but for her entire empire. The Empress was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she no longer had to do it alone. The first light of dawn crept into the palace, spilling through the curtains and casting a soft glow across the room. The Empress stood at her window once more, but this time, the view seemed different. The city below, once a symbol of her power and control, now felt like a world filled with endless possibilities. The weight that had pressed on her chest for so long had lifted, replaced by a sense of freedom that she hadn't known she was missing. Last night, everything had changed. The human waiter, with his quiet grace and simple kindness, had opened her eyes to a truth she had been too afraid to see. Her empire, for all its grandeur, had been built on the wrong foundation. She had focused on strength, on maintaining control, but in doing so, she had isolated herself and her daughter from the world. Her daughter, once a symbol of her failure, had been set free, not by a cure, but by something far more powerful: human connection. The Empress knew now that her empire could not thrive if it was built on isolation and control. It had to be built on understanding, empathy, and trust. She had spent years living behind walls, thinking that power was all that mattered, but in truth, the most powerful force in the universe was connection, and it was through that connection that true change could happen. She turned away from the window and walked toward her daughter's room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, she could see her daughter sitting by the window, looking out at the city. Her daughter, the one she had tried so hard to protect, was finally living, truly living. The smile on her face, the way her eyes shone with newfound hope, it was all because of the simple act of kindness from someone who had nothing to gain. As the Empress stepped into the room, her daughter turned to look at her, and for the first time in years, the Empress didn't see a child who needed to be fixed. She saw a young woman who was capable of so much more than anyone had ever given her credit for. The human waiter had done what the Empress could never do. He had given her daughter the freedom to be herself, to experience the world without fear or limitation. "Mother," her daughter said softly, her voice full of warmth and confidence, "I think I'm ready to see the world." The words struck the Empress like a thunderclap, but they didn't scare her. Instead, they filled her with a sense of pride. Her daughter wasn't just ready to see the world, she was ready to live in it, to take part in it fully. And the Empress knew that her role now was to help her daughter step into that world, not as a ruler or protector, but as a guide, a mother who was willing to embrace change, to let go of the old ways. "Then we will," the Empress replied, her voice steady but full of emotion. Together, the decision had been made. There would be no turning back. The Empress would open the gates of her empire, not just to the outside world, but to the possibility of a new future. She would no longer rule with fear. She would rule with love. And in doing so, she would create an empire that was not just strong, but compassionate. A world where everyone, no matter their differences, could find a place to belong. As the day began, the Empress walked beside her daughter, not as a ruler and subject, but as to individuals ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would shape the future of the empire, one built not on the chains of control, but on the bonds of connection. And for the first time in a long while, the Empress felt truly free.